Welcome to another exciting and informative edition of New Horizons for America, featuring Dr. Jim Polakof. Here we seek the truth and discover how to improve your well-being. This new episode focuses upon the lack of sleep and the growing predicament of sleep apnea. Now to Dr. Jim.
So are you tired or exhausted when you wake up in the morning? You're not alone. It's been estimated that some 50 to 70 million people here in the United States actually suffer from some type of sleep disorder. And 22 million of them have been diagnosed with sleep apnea, our topic for the day. The primary type of this disease is known as obstructive sleep apnea, also known as OSA. If you have OSA, the tissue in your throat blocks your airway when your muscles relax during sleep. Then the air has to squeeze through this blockage, causing you to snore. People with OSA often gasp for air, causing them to wake up briefly, but then they fall back to sleep and the process repeats itself again. People suffering from OSA can wake up as many as dozens to hundreds of times each night. And that's what leaves them tired and exhausted the next day. So to get to the bottom of this, my guest is Boyd Goodson, Vice President and General Manager of Lofta. Lofta has revolutionized the diagnosis and treatment of sleep apnea, and we're going to find out about it today. Let's welcome my guest, Boyd Goodson. On behalf of all those snorers in our audience, it's good to have you wake us up to some news about how we can attack and certainly deal with sleep disorders. So welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. We're
Good.
excited to talk about sleep disorders and anything we can do to help.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because we do need help. There are so many millions of Americans in that plight. But in any case, I've explained to our audience that OSA, obstructive sleep apnea, keeps you from breathing normally during sleep. And obviously, snoring can be a real pain, particularly for your mate. But in any case, if you have sleep apnea, perhaps, Boyd, you can talk about some of the problems that stem from that, like cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, that's a great question because sometimes we focus on the obvious symptoms and impacts, which is snoring and kind of a poor night's sleep. But the downstream impacts of sleep apnea are pretty severe and end up causing a lot of other health issues. So you mentioned cardiac disease. Cardiac disease is much higher prevalence when you have sleep apnea. And part of it is the extra strain it puts in your heart while you're sleeping. So somebody that has an AHI of 30 to 60, they're in that kind of moderate to severe range. They stop breathing, they have an obstructive event once a minute, once every 2 minutes. And what happens is your heart has to start working extra hard because your oxygen saturation goes down. Your body still needs oxygen and it starts pumping faster. So sometimes people, while they're sleeping, their heart rate might jump up to about 150, 160 beats per minute, which is, if you're doing a pretty serious workout, you might hit that level. And so over time, this just starts to impact your heart negatively, and you end up with heart disease as a comorbid impact of untreated sleep apnea.
Right, and it's not just older people who have heart attacks and strokes. Younger people as well. We're seeing more of that.
Absolutely. The great Reggie White, NFL defensive end, Hall of Fame caliber player, he died in his sleep 4 years after he retired from the NFL. So this is a guy that's peak fitness. He had sleep apnea, went untreated, and he died of a severe heart arrhythmia that was caused by his sleep apnea. So it's a serious condition even for the young and fit. And I mean, that guy was pretty much like Superman physically and still passed away from the impacts of untreated sleep apnea.
It can happen to anyone. Now, I would imagine also when we're talking about job performance, it also affects job performance. I would imagine conditions like you tend to be more depressed, your psychosomatic problems, anxiety, even PTSD, right?
Yes, I think that's a great point. I think sleep is one of the unique things in our life that impacts our physical well-being and our emotional well-being. It's really hard to have mental well-being and proper mental health if you're not getting that restorative sleep. And so it leads to things like anxiety, depression, all these mental health issues that can be traced back to poor sleep. For me, when you talk about job performance, if you have a disorder that's untreated that causes you to be excessively drowsy in the afternoons and fall asleep during the day, that can't help your job performance. And a lot of people have this issue and it's caused by an underlying disease, but they tend to blame themselves, right? We don't say, well, this disease is making me fall asleep on the job or making me drowsy or non-responsive, or I don't have the cognitive abilities.
They look for other excuses.
Yeah, they look for other excuses. They blame themselves. It's a little bit like if you're waking up every minute while you sleep, and then you wake up and you don't have the energy to tackle proper diet and exercise, you blame yourself for the weight gain instead of saying, well, maybe I have a disorder that is causing these downstream effects. And so we're a big proponents of saying, look, if you have these symptoms, let's see if sleep's the problem and let's get you tested. Because,
well, and also people, when they get behind the wheel, I mean, there are more, actually, I believe twice as many auto accidents resulting from people who have sleep apnea.
Absolutely. I think we've seen a lot of data on the impact of drowsy driving as it kind of compares to drunk driving. But a lot of this drowsy driving can be traced back to untreated sleep apnea. And whether it's in the Department of Transportation industry or just average drivers, you can fall asleep just sitting at a stop sign.
So Boyd, the big question is, how do we determine whether or not we have sleep apnea? What are your thoughts on that? It's more than snoring, right?
Yeah, it is more than snoring. Snoring can be an indicator, but it's a certain type of snoring. If you have any gasping issues, that tends to be a telltale sign. The good news about sleep apnea is it's not that hard to figure out. We just have to look in the right place. So you can take an online quiz that'll tell you whether or not you're likely to have sleep apnea, whether or not you should get a sleep test.
Now on Lofta.com, you have that quiz, am I correct?
Yeah, we do. Even if you just go to lofta.com/quiz, it's a pretty good diagnostic. It's not enough to get a prescription for a sleep test. It's not enough to diagnose, but it'll kind of tell you, if you score above a certain number, then you might be 3 times more likely to have sleep apnea. So it helps you narrow it in to decide if you should get tested. But the good news is it used to be a really tough process to get tested. You had to schedule in a sleep lab. You had to go and spend multiple nights in a sleep lab. And that's what our founder went through. It took him basically 1.5 years from start to finish to get tested, to find somebody to sell him a CPAP, to get on CPAP therapy and finally experience good sleep. And we were founded around the idea that should be a 1 to 2 week process that you can do mostly from your home. And we've really worked hard on that model to make it accessible to people that want to figure out if they have a sleep disorder or not.
Well, I think that's very helpful too. Well, I looked at it. It's very simple to do. Just go on to lofta.com and there's the sleep quiz. And at least it gives you an indication, where you might be headed or if you're already possibly there. I understand that when let's say, for example, it's been suspected, your doctor may tell you, or you might, through the quiz, suspect you have sleep apnea. Now we go into a study to determine if you really have it.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, there are a couple of different types of studies, or two main studies. The polysomnogram, I believe, is one of them, which you do in a clinic or nearby hospital. And the other one, of course, is the home study. So perhaps you can explain the difference in what we face trying to make that decision.
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are valuable times when doing a full PSG under supervision of medical professionals is the right path. And it tends to be if you have comorbidities that are severe, or if you might have mixed sleep apnea or heavy central sleep apneas, then a polysomnogram can really help the medical team narrow in on exactly what's going on. But for your garden variety obstructive sleep apnea, a home sleep test, especially one that will pick up on centrals versus obstructive sleep apnea, can really give you all the data you need to diagnose. And so for that reason, like we for instance, with Lofta, we involve a board certified sleep physician in the process.
I think that's important because, people say, well, I have to go to my own doctor. And at Lofta, of course, you're going to describe, your process and why it was designed that way. But you do actually, a professional is judging what you should go forward and actually can give you a prescription, right?
Yeah, they can. They can give you a prescription. And so the way we've designed our process is you talk to that professional before the home sleep test, and they have to look at your medical history and decide if a home sleep test is appropriate or if it's not appropriate. And if it is appropriate, they'll issue the prescription. We'll get you a home sleep test. And then on the back end, that same professional looks at the results. And there are times where they look at that and say, you know what, you've got more going on here than just basic obstructive sleep apnea. We need to get you in a sleep lab, and we'll refer out that data to, whoever you work with locally. And that can be frustrating sometimes because people just want to get started and get it fixed. But there are some cases where a sleep lab and the traditional medical process makes sense for the safety of the patient. But I would say 98% of the cases that come through Lofta, if a sleep test is appropriate for you, then the diagnosis is something that can be handled remotely.
Well, a couple of questions come to mind. Well, first of all, it seems to me it's so difficult these days to even get an appointment with your primary care doctor, and then they give you about 7 minutes. I think that's the average time that a primary care physician spends with a patient. But in any case, rather than having to go through that, they can actually contact your company, Lofta, directly, and they're able to then talk to a professional. Now, you mentioned medical records. I mean, do you have to supply medical records, or do you have a questionnaire that people fill out?
That's a good question. Yeah, we because we are cash pay, and we've kind of made this path outside of the traditional healthcare program. We don't require medical records. We do have an intake form that our customers have to supply the relevant medical history that helps the doctors we work with make a diagnosis and judge safety on use of a home sleep test.
So your doctor will look at the questionnaire before you ever talk to a professional at your company, and then you can determine whether or not you go on from there, correct?
Absolutely.
Or if it's very serious, you might then say you really need to go see your primary care physician, and we'll supply that information to them. Am I correct?
That's correct. I mean, for one simple case, we get people who are parents of juveniles who have sleep apnea and they want to use our home sleep test. And that's one of the flags right away where our doctors will look at that and say, wait, if it's somebody under the age of about 16, there might be more things going on. We want to have them in a lab, see what's happening. And so we'll refer them out right away and won't even bother with a home sleep test. There's other heart conditions that may make it trickier that they'll flag as well. But there's just a few examples where they look at that intake form pretty closely and make sure that it's appropriate.
When I think you said in 9 out of 10 cases, you're probably able to deal directly with the client or customer, and they don't need to necessarily go through their doctor to determine whether or not they might have sleep apnea.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, obviously we'll talk about the solutions in a bit. But I don't want to bore you with this, but I do want to share a story with you and with our audience at the same time. Actually, it's a story about myself and my wife. A number of years ago, my wife was, she wasn't diagnosed, but the physician was concerned that she might have sleep apnea. So they wanted her to go through a sleep study, and she was not too crazy about that. But in any case, she went ahead, and there was a clinic nearby the hospital, and so they hooked her up with all types of wires. And oh my God, I've never seen so many wires and detectors and things of that nature. And then on top of it, as she tries to go to sleep, you've got a person observing what's happening. Now, I don't know how you feel, but I mean, if somebody's watching me when I go to sleep, it's pretty difficult for that to happen. So I got a call at 3:00 in the morning from my wife saying, I can't sleep. Can you come pick me up? Oh, yes, I came and picked her up. And, obviously the sleep apnea test was somewhat inconclusive.
Yes.
Now, we turned this around a short time ago, as you know. I actually went ahead and took advantage of your Lofta sleep test. I went through it, and I was a pretty good candidate for it.
Yeah.
It was really kind of simple. I mean, we have this watch that I put on, and that was attached to a chest sensor, which I put on, and I stuck my finger into a probe and I pushed start.
Yeah.
And I went to sleep, and I actually slept pretty good that night. I slept through the night, and maybe I got up once. I think that was about it.
Yeah.
But then the next morning I woke up and I clicked end recording, and the data was transmitted to your company.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I got my results, which I won't discuss on air, but I have to say that I was very impressed by the entire process, how easy it was, how simple it was to get this done at home rather than going through what my wife went through. So does this sound about right to you?
That sounds like the process. And we've, our focus at Lofta is just trying to make it as easy as possible and as approachable as possible. We partnered with Itamar on the actual hardware we use for the sleep test, and we feel like they're best in class. What's that?
Who is Itamar?
Itamar is an Israeli technology company that developed the WatchPat home sleep test. And so we use the WatchPat 1, which is their disposable but clinical grade sleep test.
And so this is the watch you put on your wrist, right?
This is the watch you put on your wrist, and then that transmits data back to Lofta, and we use that to create the sleep reports and interact with our physicians. But it's the same technology that the VA hospital system uses for all of their testing and that Kaiser uses for their testing. So it's not kind of a lightweight home sleep test. It's a very rigorous sleep test that gives you a lot of channels of data, not quite as many channels of data as the PSG, but it's pretty rigorous, and we find it fits that balance of easy to use but quality data.
And I have to say, I highly recommend the test because it's simple. It's not invasive. I feel comfortable. I felt like I could sleep, and that's so important. So that's something our audience certainly should take into consideration, but I personally highly recommend it.
That's great.
Let's talk a bit about the next step. The verdict comes back and you're diagnosed with sleep apnea.
Yeah.
Okay. How does Lofta help us at that point?
That's great. So if you're diagnosed with sleep apnea and you take a home sleep test with us, you get a prescription for CPAP therapy. It could be for positional therapy if you have positional sleep apnea, which is, let's say the architecture of your neck is such that your apnea only affects you when you're on your back. There's certain devices you can use that'll help you sleep on your side, and that might take care of the issue. But CPAP is really the gold standard right now for therapy. And we can support clients on CPAP. We are a little different in that we're cash pay. You can use HSA or FSA funds with us, but to keep this streamlined and easy, we don't go through the insurance process. Insurance tends to want to rent you a machine, and you have to prove compliance and usage for them to keep paying for it.
But you supply the data so that individuals can present that,
yes,
the final bill to their insurance company, right?
Yeah, they can. And so people can use our sleep test, take the test, work with their insurance company. Some insurance company want you in a sleep lab, so they won't take a home sleep test. So you need to check that beforehand. For us, though, with our clients that end up buying from Lofta with a CPAP, we find that deciding you want to do a home sleep test is one big step. Deciding you want to start CPAP therapy is another big step. But getting used to sleeping with a CPAP is not the easiest thing in the world. You have to get used to sleeping with a mask on, and that mask pushes pressurized air into your airway to keep the airway open.
So talk about the CPAP. The CPAP is actually a machine, or
yes, it is.
You have a variety of machines, I'm assuming.
There's a few different types of machines depending on the diagnosis and the needs. There's travel devices now, but the basic function of all of these is it senses your breathing, and it uses a motor to pressurize air into your airway to keep it open while you're sleeping. But what we found is critical is to have a team of respiratory therapists on staff that check in with new clients. It starts off with a weekly call. How did it go last night? How does your mask fit? Where you there's a lot of anxiety around learning how to sleep with a CPAP machine. So it takes a little while. And we try to encourage our customers to start simply, try to use it for a couple of hours, take it off, and work their way up. And so we have a team of people that will help you adjust to that process over the first, a month to 6 months, depending on how severe your sleep apnea was. What we found is the more severe your sleep apnea is, if you're kind of an AHI of 30, which means your body is waking you up every 2 minutes, the health benefits that you feel when you wake up after 1 or 2 good nights of sleep on a CPAP kind of make you a devotee right away. And so you'll kind of fight through that discomfort of learning how to sleep with a mask on. People that have an AHI of 5, or you're right borderline, whether you're diagnosed with sleep apnea or not, you may not feel as much of the health benefits, even though they're there. And so those cases are a little harder. They need a little more encouragement to help people be compliant and build those habits of sleeping with the CPAP. But that's Lofta's whole vision is, sleep testing's great, CPAP's great, but if you don't combine the education with the testing, with the machinery you need, and then the coaching to make you successful, then it's really hard to start CPAP therapy and be successful on it. So
that
we
makes
try to
sense.
combine all those things under one roof.
I can see where the coaching would be extremely important in this,
Yeah.
but also as far as the masks, because I mean, obviously masks fit differently on different
Yeah.
people, and you have your comfort zone. I mean, you just don't have one mask. Your customers can actually choose from several, right?
That's a great point. There's a lot of different masks available, and depending on how you breathe and how you sleep, different masks are different fits. There's some, if you're an active sleeper and you roll around a lot, which we can tell from your sleep test, it's not just for sleep apnea. It tells you kind of how you sleep and how active you are. Then there's some masks that allow that swivel to happen and won't bind you up. If you breathe through your mouth more, there's some masks that'll cover your mouth. If you're a nose breather, you can sleep with a mask that just kind of barely covers your nose and is very minimal. So depending on how you breathe, how you sleep, and the shape of your face, we can fit you in a different mask that's just the right fit for you.
All right. Well, that's now, and you mentioned traveling. I think you have something like an Air Mini package, because I
Yes.
know many of our people are executives who, and obviously travel in different parts of the country. And
Yeah.
if they're going to keep this up, they need something that goes with it. So maybe you could describe that a bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. We have we sell the ResMed Air Mini. We feel that's the best in class travel device, and CPAP users can spot each other in the airport because it's a second carry-on you usually take with your CPAP. Because it is, if you're a religious CPAP user, going for 3 days without it is really tough, especially when you're on a work trip and you need to be alert. But the ResMed Air Mini is much smaller. Lower power profile. You don't need water with it. It kind of self-humidifies. So it's a great option. There's some of my favorite stories with customers is we had one customer that just came back. He and his wife both use CPAP. They took Air Minis with them with batteries and solar panels on a photo safari in Africa. And they came back from their vacation and shared photos with us, and it was incredible. But they were out kind of in the bush in tents, and they still had their CPAP therapy that traveled with them. And so seeing that kind of experience of our customers is really fun and they can still get out there in the world. They don't worry about finding distilled water. They don't have to worry about powering up a huge unit or carrying the unit itself. You can take the Air Mini backpacking pretty easily. So,
well, and I don't want to belabor the situation, but I want to get back to the actual machines just for a moment.
Yeah.
Only because much of our audience, obviously, they're listening to this interview on different platforms, Spotify, iHeart, Apple, and the question is this: they're not able to see this machine.
Yeah.
Now, our viewers on YouTube will see it, but
Okay.
the idea is this a giant machine that sits in your room, or is this a small, compact? I mean, describe where it is so people get a sense of what this CPAP machine is actually like.
Yeah, that's a great point, because sometimes I think people have in mind a big piece of medical equipment that's hospital issued, but even the non-travel devices, they're about, I would say, 10 to 12 inches in length, maybe 6 inches tall, 6 inches deep. So kind of a little rectangular box that fits in your nightstand. And then it's got a tube coming off the top of it that runs to your bed. And then there's a mask that attaches to that tube.
So you don't have to rearrange your room and make
No.
it look like a hospital room of some
Yeah.
type. I mean, it's just, you go about your normal life and you put it on your nightstand, and that's all the space it really needs.
Yeah. And then the Air Mini might be 5 inches long, 2-3 inches thick. So it's kind of the profile of an iPhone, but 2 inches thick instead. So it's much smaller than the bigger standard devices. But in either case, this isn't like an oxygen concentrator that sits over in the corner of the room. It's a little desktop device.
Oh, well, that's good to know. So, as they say, all good things must come to an end. And I want to thank you. I'm going to use a pun for uncovering all of these facts about sleep apnea. I think it's important. Our audience needs to know more about it. Obviously, we suggest our listeners and viewers go to your website, particularly to take that sleep quiz. I think that's such a great idea. You go to lofta.com, but I also want to remind our audience, because so many listeners and viewers do come to our website, we're going to have all this information on our website as well. So I think that's important. So in any case, Boyd, I want to thank you for sharing all of this information with us. I think it's quite valuable. I mean, so many millions of people are suffering from sleep disorders, and obviously sometimes it's sleep apnea. So you need to know. So I want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We're grateful for the chance to spread our message and spread awareness around sleep apnea. We feel like, the more people we can help, whether they end up on therapy with Lofta or with some other company, it still helps the overall healthcare system, and we see the impact in people's lives. It makes a huge difference when they tackle their sleep and they finally start getting that restorative sleep they've been missing. So we're grateful for the chance to talk with you today.
So, and I wish you a good night's sleep.
All right. Take care.
You can access more information about sleep apnea and Lofta's You Might Have It quiz, along with other valuable information on our website, jamespolakof.com. Plus, you'll find many other great podcasts. And please keep your comments coming. It helps us to better understand what your wants and needs are. Again, our website is jamespolakof.com. That's James, Polakof.com. Plus, we have a very big surprise coming. Now back to Dr. Jim Polakof.
Well, I think we've learned how important good, solid sleep is every night. It's what's going to help us prevent things like cardiovascular disease, depression, anxiety, daytime drowsiness. So why don't we review the symptoms of sleep apnea so you know what to look for? I have a list. Morning headaches, excessive daytime sleepiness, lack of energy, irregular breathing during sleep, snoring, nighttime gasping or choking, frequent urination at night, depression, reflux, and enlarged neck size. Those are the things you need to look for. So we've got the information. All you need to do is visit our website, jamespolakof.com. And you can also take that Lofta sleep apnea test. I think it would be a good way to see if there's any possibility you might have it. So again, you'll find that on our website, jamespolakof.com. In any case, I want to thank you for joining us. And please, once again, look for us each week because we'll have a new episode. And when you go to our website, you can even see a variety of great past episodes. So again, really appreciate you being with us. Send in your comments. We're interested in how you feel, what you would like to hear or see. In any case, enjoy, stay healthy, get some really good sleep.